Oh, what is this? Hey.
The children, with their very long needles, their tuneless songs, their ghastly errands, their ghoulish Frankenstein fathers. But we've all placed our hand on the great chain of endeavor. My hand is on it. Fontaine's is on it. We all pull it and are pulled by it. Yes, these children are an abomination. But it is not my hand alone on the chain that created them. No. Their little fingers were right there, next to mine.
I'm going to quick save it real quick. Now I'm going to pause because I got something to say. It's just reminded me what Ryan said. And the whole idea of Andrew Ryan, ostensibly referencing Ayn Rand, Andrew Ryan, fair enough. But I think this game is not a valid critique of libertarianism, certainly less libertarianism than objectivism, yada, yada. These are not the same things. There's a lot of libertarians that are quasi-objectivist and vice versa, but they are separate philosophies. Okay, all that said, one thing I said recently, well, and I can't play and talk at the same time, so we're talking right now. This is happening. One thing I said recently was that judging libertarianism an ultimately impossible ideology to implement, in some way self-defeating, judging that, drawing that conclusion from Bioshock is like referencing Lord of the Rings as some kind of proof that monarchy is the superior form of government. These things don't follow. This game is not an accurate representation of libertarian principle, not even when it was made. It's just not, you know, it raises some interesting questions and things that need to be dealt with in terms of application of how much freedom is too much. Where do you draw the line? Great questions. Bringing me to my point. Okay, this is a fantasy setting. Plasmids, this genetic technology. That is what caused the downfall of Rapture. So the freedom to invent whatever you want, modify yourself, and then psychosis. Okay, so that's a complete fantasy technology, doesn't exist. We can imagine, what if it did? Would that consequence necessarily obtain? If it did, maybe, maybe not. But certainly that's one fantasy element that just throws it all out the window. It's like, we don't have that in the real world right now. So not a good corollary, not a good allegory or whatever. You know, this is not an appropriate cautionary tale for true libertarian principles implemented practically in the world today. It does raise questions of whether we should have limits on that stuff, whether is any way to use libertarianism to enact proper limits on that, or is it just a free-for-all? Now, I don't think it is. And one line I would draw in, and this, okay, all of this, long story short, to get around to this, you can't take children. Certainly you can't kidnap children, which is what happened to at least one girl. We know it. Nor can you experiment on children and turn them into little sisters. This is not, without which you can't have Adam, without which you can't have plasmids. So all of that is off the table. It like literally the entire fantasy setup just suggested by this game would itself be prohibited under libertarian principles, violation of the NAP. So what would I do personally if someone is kidnapping children and doing medical experiments on them and turning them into little Frankenstein abominations? I would, let's say, take action towards physical removal of that person from, you know, maybe they go out in airlock, hypothetically, in Bioshock. That's all I'm saying. These things tend to take care of themselves, and I would damn sure step up to do that personally under the circumstances. So even the fantasy setting, we can imagine what if thought experiment style, there are reasons within that to negate that fantasy setup in the first place. And, you know, in this version of the story, they chose not to imagine anyone tried to do that. At least they don't mention it, that anyone tried to stop it. Or Andrew Ryan's response to it. It's just like, okay, this happened and nobody did anything. Fair enough. Could that happen? Possibly. possibly. It's not impossible, but it's also not plausible enough to be any kind of effective critique of libertarianism. So, sorry, Thoth, or Thoth, however you say it, Thoth's apprentice, talking to you, buddy. It's just not a good example. So, anyway, that's my rant. I might clip this and put it up. We'll see.